Hello, everyone. It is Dr. Tracy Schroyer here, and I am getting ready to start our weekly training. Please give me a hashtag live if you are joining me live, or hashtag replay if you are listening to the replay. I believe I could see my comments here. Set up for success. Check one more thing before we dive in. And we are good. All right. So this week's weekly training is on the topic of job interview questions, and it's not the questions that you may get in a job interview as a candidate. Rather, it is questions that you would ask the interviewer or interviewers in a job interview. So, we're going to talk more about the importance of asking the right questions, crafting insightful questions. We're also going to talk about making sure that you're confident in asking the questions that you have in a job interview. Before we jump in with those specific pieces of the training, I wanted to make sure if you have not yet, I do have this 10 must ask interview questions and why they matter. So if you want this free list of these 10 interview questions, this is really nice, and I'll show you a snippet of it. So it gives you an interview question, why it matters, and some tips for that question. So these are some questions that you can consider. If you do not have this yet and you're interested in it, drop the word, um, or let me see, drop the word questions in the chat, and I'll make sure you get a link to access this. So it's 10 must-have interview questions and why they matter. The other thing is that you can get that list, and you can also choose to upgrade. Put upgrade in the comments if you're interested in this, and upgrading gives you access to the workbook for your job interview prep. And this is really nice because in addition to having those questions that you can ask, this gives you before, during, and after the interview what are some things to consider and to make note of. So you can go through and do some, like this is company research before you do the interview, understanding the role based on what you see publicly available, commonly asked questions that are going to come up for the interview and being able to prep for those, making sure that you notate the logistics, note taking for during the interview, some potential questions that you can ask to the interview, which we'll be talking about more of the logistics of that, and then after the interview, being able to reflect on what went well, areas of improvement, follow up actions that may be needed. In addition, there is a nice template in here, and when you request this, when you do this upgrade, you get the electronic version, so you can copy and paste this template and tweak what you need for a really nice follow-up email after your interview to be able to send out. So again, if you want the 10 must ask interview questions, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. I might pick one or two from the list that we can talk about today. Put the word question in the comments, and if you're interested in this and upgrading in addition to the questions, having this workbook, which is $15, put the word upgrade in the comments. So just wanted to cover those briefly before we dig in. So again, if you are just joining us, hello, welcome to our weekly training. I am Dr. Tracy Schroyer, and today we're going to focus on the crucial aspect of job interviews and mastering the art of asking the right questions. So this session is really designed to help you stand out in your interviews, make a lasting impression, and ultimately land the job that you desire. So, by the end of this training today, you're going to understand the importance of asking the right questions in an interview. You're going to learn how to craft insightful questions that showcase your knowledge and your interest. And you're going to be able to gain some techniques for confidently presenting your question during the interview. So, are you ready? Let's dive in. So, first, we're going to talk about the importance of asking the right questions. So, it's really important that you ask the right questions in an interview. It really demonstrates that you are prepared, that you have a genuine interest not only in the role, but in the organization. It gives you some valuable insights that you may not have already gotten up to that point in the interview. And you have to remember that you're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. So you are trying to find out. I know if you're somebody who's desperate, really needs a job, maybe this doesn't seem as much like it, but sometimes people go through an interview and are like, I do not want to work for that organization, or I do not want to work for that person. And that is perfectly acceptable. That's the whole reason you do this interview, to get insight into who are those individuals, who's the company that you're working for, and see if it feels like a right fit for you. Sorry, the mowers came right as I jump on here today. Um, so let's talk about some of the types of questions that you can ask. So you can ask company specific questions that show that you've done your homework. So you can find a lot of information on the company website, probably a lot more if it's a public company versus a private company, but their website usually gives you insight into who they are, what they do, the products and services, hiring, and what that process looks like. Sometimes you'll get more information on employees and what goes on with employees in the organization and things like that, DE&I groups, and different opportunities to volunteer, and things like that. You'll also want to consider role specific questions. Oh, back to the company specific. There are sites like Glassdoor.com is probably the most prevalent one that I've used. Glassdoor.com, you can go on and you can learn more about a company. You can see what the people have rated their CEO or the head of the organization, see if they're favorable to that person and get some comments. Some of those you definitely have to take with a grain of salt. So be cautious of going in there. A lot more people probably comment if it's a negative than people going in to give the praise. So be cautious of that. But Glassdoor.com, Salary.com may give you insight into organizations. So those are a few to check out for the company. Role specific questions specific to that role that you are applying to really helped you to understand the expectations and responsibilities pretty much on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, those types of things. What you're going to be doing on the in and out day to day for that job. And then the other thing is you want to learn more about the culture of the organization and the team. The culture of the team, how the team is organized, the reporting structure, different things like that you might be interested in. So, those give you a real sense of the work environment that you're going to be going into. Important just as much if it's virtual, hybrid, or in person. So, be mindful of that. What you want to make sure that you do is you avoid some common mistakes. So you don't want to ask very generic or irrelevant questions. Think of your questions as you have like this could be gold, the information that you get from it, and you don't want to waste one of those questions for a question that could be a good one and that you get some great insight from. So don't ask irrelevant questions. Also, be mindful of who you are asking what questions to. You may ask a recruiter doing a phone screen different questions than you would ask the hiring manager versus different questions that you might ask another manager or employees on the team. So be mindful of that too. What I typically say is to do a brain dump of all the questions you have from looking at the job description, from looking at the organization a little bit more. Just do a brainstorm, write down, put down all of these questions that you have, and then you can organize them and tweak them as to who might you ask these questions to. And then you can also figure out, okay, maybe I have 20 questions for the hiring manager. If you're in the interview, the likelihood is that you're not going to have enough time to ask 20 questions. So, what I recommend to my clients is you're going to put these questions in order of importance. So, what's that priority order? And then you're going to draw a line at one point, probably under number five or six, number five or six of your questions, and draw a line to say, okay, if I at least know these, maybe it's four, five, six questions. If I know the answers to these, I'm going to feel comfortable with moving on and being able to make a decision if I'm asked. If I need to, the rest of them, I can hold those. Like if I have another interview after this for that role or with a different person or something, I could ask those questions as well. You don't want to go on them with like 20 questions. Even 10 is a bit much. So think about what are those most important questions that you want to ask and get answered. So let's talk about crafting insightful questions. So you definitely want to do your research and you want to be prepared before you go into a job interview. Um, Start out by, like I mentioned, researching the company, learning more about the industry if you don't already know, understanding more about the specific role that you're applying for. You can find out a lot of information again for these through like glassdoor.com, through salary.com, and a lot of other, I think it's the occupational handbook, ONET, I believe, it will tell you more about roles specifically. You also want to look at if the company doesn't already share news articles and news information about what's been happening with them. Especially public companies, you'll see this a lot. Smaller or private companies, not to say they're smaller, but private companies, there will also typically be some news about them as well. So you want to see, is that positive news? Is it not so great news? Like what's going on with the organization so it can give you a little bit of insight and maybe it helps you to formulate some of the questions that you have as well. You could also look at LinkedIn and look at LinkedIn and the search button and the search bar. You could actually type the name of the organization, click enter, and when it comes up, look at I think it's companies or organizations is the thing, and you can look at their company page on LinkedIn and see more information about them by going through the menu items that are across once you're in that organization. So, based on your research, what you want to do is you want to develop questions that highlight your knowledge and your interests. Remember, we want to show that we have genuine interest in the role and in the organization and being part of this team. So, instead of asking just about, hey, can you tell me what the company culture is like? You could ask a more focused question based on what you may find on information about the company. And maybe a question you have instead is I noticed that your company emphasizes continuous learning and development. Can you tell me how this is implemented within the team I'll be working with? So you could see how that's different. It's very focused versus that very open-ended kind of that answer could go anywhere. You're focusing on one aspect of that company culture, the continuous learning and development, and you're also being specific as to how is this implemented within the team. So a question like that would likely be asked of the hiring manager. Maybe other employees within the team if you talk to them and what opportunities do they have for continuous learning and development, professional development, things like that. So it's really important to make sure that you're customizing your questions, that you're doing that research ahead of time. Use the job description, any information you've been able to gather about the company, so you can tailor your questions specifically to the role and to the organization, as well as do they have bigger projects, goals, different things going on that you're able to see through maybe it's even employees' LinkedIn posts or a LinkedIn post on the company page or news articles that you found or information on their website or information you found on salary.com or glassdoor.com, things like that. So you want to make sure that you are being very specific to that role, to that organization, and it's not just a generic 3 or 4 questions you always ask in an interview because it shows that you have done your research, that you're coming in prepared, and that you genuinely, again, are interested in being part of that organization in that role and in that team. The last thing I want to cover here, and then I'll cover a couple of the 10 must ask interview questions, is that you really want to think about uh, timing of asking your questions because that can be really important. It's usually best to ask your questions at the end, towards the end of the interview. What you'll typically see or hear is that the either the recruiter, the hiring manager, or whoever is leading the interview may tell you at the beginning, hey, we're going to spend X amount of time asking you questions, and then we have some time reserved at the end so that you can ask whatever questions that you may have. So that's kind of your signal of when that's coming. They may also, and I've had this happen to myself, is say, they'll start to ask you questions and then they take a pause what other questions do you have for, what questions do you have for us? And then I was able to ask some questions, and then they ended up saying a little bit more about next steps and kind of what was going on from there. Or they may ask additional questions. Um, so you want to make sure that you are delivering your questions clearly and confidently. Practice them beforehand if necessary. Maybe it's looking in a mirror, maybe it's recording yourself on your phone. It doesn't even have to be video, it could be audio. And that you sound very confident in the questions that you're asking and that you are genuinely interested and want to know the answers of these, because this can impact, whether you, if you are offered the role, whether you would want to say yes and kind of go forward and negotiate there. You want to make sure that you're engaging with the interviewer. Show that you're actively listening to their responses. Follow up, and if something piques your interest, or maybe they say something and you think of another question, like while they're interviewing, after they're done, you can answer the question and you can say, "Do you mind if I ask a follow up question on that?" So you could do that during the interview process instead of waiting until the end. Or you can say, let me jot down a question I have for you and I'll ask it a little bit later, something like that. But generally, interview people who interview are fine with if you ask a follow-up question. Not that you're going to want to do it every single time, but if you have that, you can insert that. If they say, hey, would you mind waiting until the end? Say, yeah, let me take just a couple seconds to jot down my question so I won't forget it, that kind of thing. Perfectly fine with that. Um, and this makes sure that you're not just asking questions for the sake of asking questions, but that you're interested in what they have to say as well. So let me see. All right, so those are the items I have related to thinking about when you are in the actual interview and being able to ask the questions. I will tell you one example I have for you too is I went into an interview and I had so many questions. Like I knew a lot of information about the organization from the research that I did being prepared. I also knew information about the role from what I could learn, but it wasn't necessarily public for the specific role. So I did have a lot of questions, but I put those in a priority order. I think I probably had like 25 questions. I typed them up, put them in a priority order, and then like I said, I drew that line to say, I want at least these questions to be answered so I have a general idea. And then another tip is as you're going through the interview and you're asked questions, the interviewers or interviewer will start to give you information. And you'll want to make sure that you are, again, actively listening because you're going to take that information they give you and you can have that list of your questions in front of you and you can start to cross off the questions that they have already answered throughout the interview, because the last thing you want to do is get to the end where you can ask questions and one of your question is something that they already answered during the interview and it doesn't make it seem like you were listening at all because you're still asking that question. So be mindful of that. And you are absolutely able to have a piece of paper, or if you have something pulled up, if it's a virtual interview, something on the other side of your screen. Don't think that you can't go into an interview without your own notes and your own prep. The one thing that you just don't want to be doing is like when they ask you a question, be like, oh, hold on a second, and like flipping through all your pages trying to find, oh, I prepared an answer to that, and then like reading specifically what your answer is. Their guidance for you and support, they shouldn't be something that you have to depend on. So if you did lose them, en route to the interview, or you can't find them when you're getting ready to sign into the virtual interview, it shouldn't be something that stops you from being able to go through with the interview. They're just nice supplemental things to have. So with that, I want to cover, let me just pick two of the must ask interview questions. And again, if you're interested in this free list, we also I provide in here why it matters and tips for each of these questions. Drop me the word questions or question in the comment box and let me know, and I'll make sure you get access to that. Or you can do the upgrade, so comment upgrade for that. So let's see. Let me see. Okay, here's one. One question you could ask are, what are the immediate challenges facing the team or department. So this lets you know what are the current challenges that you might have to jump in and help with. It gives you an idea of what is the state of the team. How are things right now? Like, is it all hands on deck trying to work on projects right now? Is it like we don't have any huge immediate challenges, like we're working on projects, things like that? Gives you some insight too. Is it going to be a stressful environment or not? And granted, it could be temporarily, what's going on with the team. And it also gives you an idea of how could you make an immediate impact. So if they have a challenge and it may involve a skill gap, and that's a skill that you would bring to the table, there's great opportunity for you to come in and be effective pretty quickly in the role. So you really want to make sure that when they talk about the immediate challenges, when they answer your question, the immediate challenges for the team, um, that you express your excitement or enthusiasm for problem solving, that you want to be one of those people that help to figure out where do we go from here with the team, and that you can contribute to helping the team to overcome the challenges that they have and to be able to move forward. So the skills that you're bringing to the table are going to be very, very supportive to helping the team with the challenges that they have. And most likely that's going to happen if you're lined up with the skills that you have and the type of job that is right for you. This should be something that happens automatically. So that was one question. What are the immediate challenges facing the team or department? Let's see. So one no-no I just found in here is, can you describe the company culture? And as I mentioned in the beginning, we want to make sure that we get even more specific on that. So make sure that you, and I'll have to update a version of this in the future, make sure that you're specific into what aspects maybe that you're looking at related to culture, and dive in from there. You can ask the general question, it just could take you anywhere, and it may have follow-up questions for you as well, so it could work. Let's see. Another great question in here that I've had individuals ask before and got great insight is, what does the onboarding process look like for this role? So if you have been in any kind of organization, onboarding can look completely different from one role to the next, from one team to the next. Sometimes it is not a cookie cutter approach, and sometimes there is no like official onboarding. You might do like a new hire orientation, and then you're kind of set to the wolves and kind of figure it out and work with a buddy, maybe not. So this gives you insight into, is there an onboarding process? Is there a partial? Like, what does it look like? It gives you an expectation of what's going to happen. If you get that offer, you accept and you go in the door. Are you going to start in, get this onboarding process and with the expectation of maybe it's X number of weeks or days till you're kind of up and sustained on your own? And also how the company supports new hires. If you're somebody who has helped with onboarding in a past role and there's not a formal onboarding process for this, maybe that's something you say, hey, through my own onboarding, maybe I can give some tips and best practices to help so that the next person comes on board can have a little bit smoother process or something like that, something along those lines. Um, so you want to make sure that you're listening carefully, you're asking any follow-up questions related to this one as well. What does onboarding look like? Um, so those are just two of the 10 that we have in this packet. And if you have any questions or comments, again, give me a hashtag live or hashtag replay in the comments. But leave any questions, comments below, and I will check in. And I hope you all have a great end of the week, and I'll see you all again next week.